Whoa. Hilo, awahili, awahili. Hilo, awahili, awahili. Hilo, no tihiwi, tawakanan, halishamo. Hilo, hilo. Kikamu mahwa. Ishakawuch mahwa. Ishakawuch. Huh.
When most people think of Southern California, what comes to mind are beaches, surfing, lavish mansions, and of course Hollywood. But if you take a deeper look, the southern half of the state is one of the most biodiverse regions in the country. Look below the surface of any creek, and you just might catch a glimpse of the endangered Southern California steelhead. The Southern California steelhead is one of California's most tenacious and adaptable salmonids. Their historic range included every watershed in Southern California that drains into the Pacific Ocean.
The steelhead in Southern California occupied virtually every watershed in Southern California, and there's several thousand miles of stream habitat. The Southern California steelhead distinct population segment extends from the Santa Maria River in the north in San Luis Obispo, Santa Barbara County, all the way down south to the U.S.-Mexican border at the Tijuana River.
Steelhead are ocean-going rainbow trout. They are born in the freshwater rivers and streams and then migrate to the ocean, where they mature. Unlike salmon, they do not die after spawning and can come and go from fresh to salt water several times throughout their life. Southern California steelhead are unique in their ability to tolerate warmer water temperatures and display a great variance of choice in their stages of life history. Steelhead occupy and make use of all habitat types in these smaller, more confined river systems of the South Coast.
The Southern California steelhead differ a little bit from other species in that they exploit the entire reaches of these streams that they occupy, from the estuaries to the very extreme headwater reaches. These fish, if you look at them very carefully and examine their life history and the way they exploit their habitats, they're a perfect mirror of the chaparral environment of Southern California.
I think that they're fantastic because we're so used to thinking that our watershed or that our Mediterranean ecosystem is so different from up north. And you think of big fish, 2 and 3 feet long fish, as being something that you only see up on the Klamath or up in the redwoods, for instance. But to know that we have these magnificent fish in Southern California and that they're still here, they're still having these relic populations that very few people know about, is really, really neat, and it's something that's inspiring.
The native Chumash people of the South Coast had a relationship with steelhead for over 15,000 years. They harvested the fish at certain times of the year as an important food source. In the early 1900s, steelhead were still in such great abundance they provided excellent sport for the intrepid angler.
Trout and steelhead angling in Southern California were a major recreational activity with significant economic implications. We know from looking at the historic record that these fish were an important recreational species in Southern California, and were so right up until the construction of the major dams in the early 1950s and late 1940s.
The steelhead is such a big, magnificent fish. We call it sort of a totemic animal. It's a big, beautiful species that most people don't even know is here. I'm sure the people that do know it's here, they want to see it. They've heard all the lore and the stories about movie stars coming and fishing out these 2-foot-long fish and larger in great abundance back in the 20s and before that. So among people that know about fish, definitely it's a great allure, and I think that it would be, if more people knew about it, they would be much more interested in trying to do something to save it.
Historically, we had thousands of fish running in these streams between the Santa Maria River and the Tijuana River at the U.S.-Mexican border. Today, the runs are probably in the low hundreds of fish.
By the mid-1940s, human encroachment and subsequent residential, commercial, and agricultural development began to take its toll. The age of dams was upon us. By the late 1950s, most of Southern California's free-flowing rivers had been trapped behind walls of concrete, leaving little or no water for fish and blocking off access to miles of historic spawning and rearing habitat. At the time, little thought was given to fish passage in regards to development along the rivers. As a result, the runs of steelhead have begun to precipitously decline. Historically, much of the spawning and rearing took place in the upper watersheds and steep canyons that held colder spring-fed pools of water year-round. Once a batch of eggs was laid and hatched, those fry had the choice to head upriver and rear in the remote headwaters or head downriver and rear in the brackish estuaries. The following winter, when the rains come, those same fish have the choice to leave with the high water and head down into the ocean, or stay in the rivers for another season. On the same token, mature fish returning from the ocean have the choice to return to their natal stream, find another river with better seasonal conditions, or even wait another season for in-stream conditions to improve. These choices provide a greater chance for the survival of the species.
Southern steelhead are the most genetically diverse steelhead along the West Coast, and that diversity is going to be really important as the climate change predictions show that streams further north and populations further north are going to start experiencing conditions that are more similar to what we have here in Southern California, with increased water temperatures and potentially less stream flow. And these southern steelhead are more adapted to be able to deal with those conditions. So those genetics are going to be really important for fish further north to be able to adapt to climate change over time.
Well, the habitats in Southern California are significantly different from the habitats in Central and Northern California. They're much more variable. The fish are subjected to much more extreme conditions in flows, sediment loads, and water temperatures. But these fish are highly variable and adaptable, and they have been able to persist under natural conditions in these watersheds. So our goal is to make sure that these fish have the opportunity to continue to adapt and evolve in response to natural changing conditions.
Southern California steelhead, in a way, should not exist because here we have these fish that are going out to sea and coming back into streams that are heavily urbanized. That anything you can imagine that's been done to a stream has been done to the streams that contain steelhead in Southern California, and yet they keep coming back every year.
Southern California steelhead have been blocked from over 90% of their historic habitat. This loss of habitat, coupled with the decline of water quality and quantity along with climate change, have brought these fish to the brink of extinction. The Southern California classified steelhead is now one of the most threatened species of native fish in the United States. In 1997, they were listed as endangered under the Federal Endangered Species Act. This action has prompted the National Marine Fisheries Service to draft a species recovery plan. The Southern California Steelhead Recovery Plan is a guidance document based on the best scientific data. It lays out a region-wide strategy, which, if properly implemented, will serve to protect and accelerate the recovery of the species. A critical requirement of the plan is cross-sector cooperation of government resource agencies, water departments and districts, environmental nonprofits, and private interests.
I think in Southern California, the primary limiting factors are fish passage barriers, blocking fish from getting from the ocean up to the good perennial habitat they need to get to. Having enough water in the streams, both for habitat and migration, is another main issue. And then finally, the third big issue is preserving and enhancing lagoons near the mouth of the different streams. One of the unique things we have in Southern California is a lot of the tributary streams and headwaters are relatively pristine and protected in national forests. The problem is we can't get fish from the ocean up to those critical spawning and rearing habitats. The good thing is we actually have mapped out just about all the migration barriers in the Southern California Steelhead region. We know where they are, we know what needs to happen to address them, and a lot of it now is just implementing different fish passage projects at these different sites.
Here in Southern California, California Trout is committed to the restoration of the endangered Southern California steelhead. Obviously, restoring the Southern California steelhead will be a great challenge, but it's a challenge that environmental stakeholders like California Trout, working with resource agencies like the California Department of Fish and Wildlife and the National Marine Fisheries Service are up to. In 2012, with funding from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife's Fisheries Restoration Grant Program, California Trout formed the South Coast Steelhead Coalition, which is dedicated to the restoration of steelhead in San Diego and Orange counties. Cal Trout also created the Santa Clara River Steelhead Coalition, which is dedicated to the restoration of steelhead in a watershed that covers both Ventura and Los Angeles counties. California Trout is working with other coalitions to restore fish passage on waters, including the San Ynez River at Bradbury Dam, Matilaha Creek at Matilaha Dam, the Vern Freeman Diversion on the Santa Clara, the Santa Felicia Dam on Piru Creek, the Ringe Dam on Malibu Creek, and finally an Arizona crossing on Zuma Creek.
Restoring Southern California steelhead is a real challenge, but there are opportunities in this challenge. The opportunities in Southern California provide us a chance to learn how to reintegrate these fish into watersheds that have been extensively developed for human uses, and lessons can be learned there that can be applied in other watersheds which may not now be as heavily developed but will be in the future.
I see the steelhead as the field of dreams fish, because if you give them habitat and give them half a chance, they're very resilient, and they'll take the habitat and reproduce madly, and pretty soon you'll have a lot of fish. We've done the easy fixes for the most part, and now we're faced with really trying to reverse 100 years worth of trends of development, where we've put in these passage barriers, we've diverted water, we've changed riparian habitat, we've developed right next door, we've increased our fire frequency, we've got highways and utilities sharing very narrow competing spaces with creek channels. We've encroached in every single way you can possibly encroach into the natural world. And to reverse that and to have people make the decision to actively not do that anymore and figure out how we can reconcile and live with, rather than take over, the other species with whom we share our environment.
Who are we to separate the families of nature that live side by side with humans? We all have a responsibility to protect it. We all have to be the voice of that can't speak for itself.
A lot of people accuse me, and I know others, of kind of being fish huggers and focused in on just steelhead, but steelhead are kind of the canary in the coal mine. If you have a healthy run of steelhead, you know that you've got good water quality, you've got a healthy watershed, so you're actually providing the conditions for a healthy watershed and communities around it. So I kind of feel like restoring steelhead, to me, isn't necessarily about fishing, it's about improving watershed health for all the other species that'll benefit from it.
This whole idea of reconciliation and recognizing that fact of interconnectedness, that we think we're living separate and apart, but in fact we're not. The fish are very much a part of our world. The trees are very much a part of our world. The creek, the frogs, the bugs, they're all very much a part of our world. And if we take them out of the equation, what does that do for us as human beings? It really makes supporting our lifestyle, providing clean air to breathe, providing clean water to drink, keeping temperatures at a place where we can be comfortable, those become more and more challenging and more expensive because we have to artificially do what the natural environment is already doing for us right now for free. And that cost-benefit analysis of looking at how these ecosystem services really do play a role in our economy, we just haven't gotten very far in that conversation. And that's, I think, a really important piece of the puzzle that we have to get to. We're making the environment functional for all of us, not just the fish, but for us as well. And if we don't do that, the costs to us are ultimately going to be really huge, as opposed to the cost of keeping things going the way they are now.
Hi, I'm Sandy Jacobson. I'm the South Coast Director for California Trout, based in San Diego. And the South Coast region extends from Santa Barbara area, coastally all the way down to San Diego. And here we focus on endangered species recovery, specifically steelhead. And so their numbers are critically low. And so what we try to do is remediate some of the fish passage barriers, improve some of the steelhead habitat, so that it really promotes recovery of this endangered species.
This population is very important because we're talking about the southernmost extent of these fish, and our role in managing these populations is to monitor them, to ensure they're provided for the people of California in perpetuity, but then also to try to grow those populations, try to achieve connectivity where we can. And in addition to that, we are legislatively mandated to survey all wild trout populations every year and provide that information to the legislature.
Many people in Southern California don't even know that steelhead existed here years ago. In fact, it wasn't that long ago that they were in our rivers in somewhat of an abundance, but many changes and population growth has changed, and demographics really don't recognize that. So we decided to take on steelhead restoration, watershed recovery in this area to kind of bring that to the forefront. We see the steelhead as one mechanism for us to move forward collaboratively with all our partners, but it really is more of a holistic approach where we're very concerned about watershed health.
What's special about Santa Margarita River is that it is one of the few perennial rivers in Southern California. It runs year-round, and it has a real Spring Creek-like character to it. And so this is ideal habitat for steelhead to come back to, and we're trying to improve it in two respects. So first of all, we're removing non-native species upstream, but where we're standing now is the site of a large fish passage project that really involves a lot of partners, both state, federal, local, and it really integrates into the community.
My name is Pablo Bryant. I work for San Diego State University. I manage the Santa Margarita Ecological Reserve. Our main mission is conservation and habitat protection. The headwaters of the Santa Margarita River are extremely critical for the reintroduction of the steelhead trout because the large pool just below the outfall pipe is the ideal location for spawning and rearing. The removal of downstream barriers will allow passage for the steelhead trout up to this critical habitat at the headwaters.
This fish passage project on the Santa Margarita River started as sort of a modest design endeavor to figure out whether we could retrofit the existing structure or whether we needed to build a new 400-foot bridge. So this is one of the larger projects that CalTrout has undertaken. So now as we have gone into the design phase and it started the permitting and really brought in a lot of the community, it's really clear that the actual replacement of the existing Sandia Creek Drive bridge is the way to go. So what will happen is that you will take out a prime fish passage barrier in a very high priority steelhead recovery river. It will provide flood management by not overtopping during rainstorms, and so it increases access not only to this beautiful trail system that's right here, but also for emergency equipment and also residents that are nearby on the north side.
The Santa Clara River watershed is one of the major arteries of Southern California, draining an area over 1,600 square miles. Unlike many Southern California drainages, the Santa Clara River is largely unaltered and unchannelized, retaining much of its natural hydrology and ecosystem function. The watershed supports valuable agricultural lands and provides water for commercial and residential consumers in Ventura and Los Angeles counties. The river corridor also provides a biologically diverse and rich area that sustains a variety of plant and animal life. Among them are over 17 federally listed species, including the endangered Southern California steelhead. The watershed is also an intersection of 5 of California's 10 bioregions, particularly the South and Central Coast bioregion.
Santa Clara River is a gem in this area. It's one of the last largely wild rivers in Southern California, and it's a golden opportunity to really be able to do some fabulous protection and enhancement of the native areas, as well as help bring back listed and endangered species like least Bell's vireo, southwestern willow flycatcher, and of course Southern California steelhead.
Because of the large expanse of high quality and pristine habitat in upstream reaches, the Santa Clara River watershed has significant potential to help recover the Southern California steelhead regionally and throughout its Southern California range. The Santa Clara River was identified as a stronghold under the North American Salmon Stronghold Partnership because it has a high intrinsic potential for fish abundance and population resilience.
Managing the Santa Clara River watershed for steelhead recovery presents both great challenges and opportunities. Challenges to overcome many threats to this fish, but also opportunities to learn how to reintegrate this species back into the Santa Clara River and back into the communities that depend upon the Santa Clara River.
Despite extensive natural resources, American Rivers listed the river as critically endangered in 2005. As with most of California, the early 19th century was hard on the Santa Clara River. Human impacts, including dams, water diversions, roads, flood control, urbanization, pollution, human-induced wildfires, and invasive species have altered the watershed. These impacts, coupled with climate change, have pushed Southern California steelhead to the brink of extinction. Steelhead are the anadromous or ocean-going form of rainbow trout. Juveniles born and reared in freshwater undergo a physiological change, smoltification, which means they migrate to and mature in salt water before returning to their natal rivers or streams to reproduce. From the time they enter the river, steelhead face challenges on their migratory routes to reach the diverse and high-quality spawning and rearing habitat located in the headwaters. The Santa Clara River estuary is but 15% of its historical extent and has been encroached on by agricultural and urban development, with the added challenge of invasive and non-native plant and aquatic species diminishing the usable habitat and food sources available for steelhead. Efforts are underway to reclaim lost habitat. Much of the lower river channel is overgrown with invasive arundodonax, or giant reed, and other alien plants, which not only impede passage, reduce flows and food availability, but also increases fire intensity and frequency. Only a few short miles from the ocean, fish run into the Vern Freeman Diversion Dam, which presents a huge obstacle to steelhead's access to upstream tributaries. This dam is the most significant steelhead migration barrier within the lower Santa Clara Rivershed. The facility diverts flows from the lower river that affects in-stream flow connectivity toward the Pacific Ocean. In recent years, only a handful of steelhead have managed to navigate the Vern Freeman diversion during high-flow events. Once past Vern Freeman, they are met with a myriad of other migration barriers on just about every viable tributary that blocks miles of prime headwaters, including 2 large dams on Piru Creek. Considering that the Santa Clara River watershed historically had an annual adult steelhead run of 9,000 adults, CalTrout is a strong advocate for a fish passage alternative that modifies or considers removal of the dams and incorporates upgrading water diversion infrastructure that supports groundwater recharge. In the headwaters, fish are faced with warming waters, diminished flows, and now competition from invasive aquatic non-native species that have been introduced into the watershed. In 2012, Trout created the Southern California Steelhead Coalition to address issues related to steelhead recovery in the Santa Clara River watershed.
California trout ensures resilient wild fish in healthy watersheds for a better California. We do that by addressing complex resource issues, and one of our strategies here in Southern California to recover the federally listed Southern California steelhead is to bring local groups together through our Santa Clara River Steelhead Coalition.
Currently, the coalition partners are engaged in a series of projects that directly benefit the southern steelhead by addressing fish passage, in-stream flows, floodplain and riparian restoration and protection, invasive removal, estuary enhancement, and headwaters protection. In the estuary, Wish-Toyo Foundation completed a feasibility study to enhance and expand the habitat and recreational opportunities. Coalition partners are also considering ways to address the invasive species threat. Along the main stem, Trout, the Nature Conservancy, Santa Clara River Watershed Conservancy, and Stillwater Science are working to protect and restore riparian habitats and control invasive species. A major portion of the headwaters to the Santa Clara remain pristine and protected on public lands within the Los Padres National Forest. Throughout the tributaries, partners are working to address fish passage and flows so that fish can make it to these prime habitats. Santa Paula Creek subbasin and its tributary Sisar Creek host some of the most productive steelhead habitat in all of the Santa Clara River watershed and are the closest high-quality habitat to the ocean. Harvey Diversion is located approximately 4 miles upstream of the confluence of Santa Paula Creek and the Santa Clara River main stem and creates a large barrier to fish migration while blocking passage into the cold waters of upper Santa Paula Creek. And Trout has secured $600,000 to restore fish passage at this facility. Further up in the Santa Paula watershed, Friends of the Santa Clara River are working with a landowner to replace an old Arizona low-flow crossing with a free span bridge to allow migratory fish back into upper Sisar Creek. Piru Creek is one of the largest Santa Clara tributaries, but most of the prime steelhead water is blocked behind 2 large dams, Santa Felicia Dam and Pyramid Dam. Trout is currently working to secure flows and potentially fish passage to enable wild steelhead to return to historically accessible habitat in Piru Creek through informing the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission relicensing processes for these hydropower facilities. The upper Sespe Creek and its tributaries host some of the most diverse steelhead habitat in the Santa Clara watershed. Historically, the Sespe was one of the most popular rivers for fishing and boasted a healthy resident population of steelhead, as well as migratory adults. Trout is working on a plan to restore fish passage and eliminate warm water habitat and exotic invasive species in Rose Valley Lakes, a prime spring-fed tributary to the Sespe. The Santa Clara River is one of our best opportunities to restore wild fish abundance in Southern California. The problems are manageable, and the solutions are tangible. Partners are engaged, interested, and the projects are underway. The time to act is now if we're going to keep these iconic fish from going extinct. We are committed to long-ranging solutions that balance the needs of resilient wild fish and a sustainable water supply for our local community and biodiversity. Resilient fish are indicative of a robust water supply, healthy groundwater basins, and adequate in-stream flows. Please, join us in helping protect Southern California's Santa Clara River Steelhead. For more info on the Santa Clara River Steelhead Coalition, how to volunteer on our projects, attend our outreach events, or donate to one of our projects, please visit caltrout.org.